Eric Vanhaute è il coautore del libro di Geo-storia, docente di storia economica e sociale della Worldviews presso l'Università di Gand in Belgio.
Hi. I prefer to stand up, not because I want to be in the center, but I have a better view on you, and it allows me also to do some thinking, because what I've been asking today is to say something about the whole rationale, the whole idea behind a textbook that is on the verge of being published, translated, and so forth, and hopefully will be used in teaching and other means of education a lot. Now, when the team of CISP, Max and Katja and others contacted me asking to contribute to a basic text that would be the start of that textbook, actually the list of questions that came on the table was huge. And these are the questions I will go through with you, because on each of these questions we had to formulate a decent answer. What do we want? And of course the first question is, why history? Why do we need history to understand the world as it is? Let's say that this was the first question. We know we want to understand what kind of pressing problems, pressing questions we are facing, and certainly the youth, the youngsters of today are facing. Why do you need history? Why do you need a history? Or I would say, what kind of history then? What kind of history of humanity? What is humanity? How do we define it? How do we handle that unruly bunch of creatures that we call humans? And how do you write a human history? And the next level then, what about that global thing? Global history, or world history. What makes a history global? What makes a history a world thing? What do you need to pretend that you can say that this has a global view? And the last question that came on the table is that it had to deal one way or another with what I said, a set of themes, of questions that are now taking into account, that are now on the table of humanity in the 21st century. And some of these questions, of course, are part of the famous or infamous list of global millennium goals. So in what way can we bring in these elements in a historical textbook? So then the second big discussion was, okay, but what kind of text do you want? How long can it be? We are academics, we are used to write books of 700 pages, but this is not what you mean. You don't want a book with 1,000 footnotes. No, it must be a book, 3-volume book of about 200, 250 pages that can be used in class, and that should contain all these basic elements. So this was a huge challenge, and I'm talking about well, a year and a half ago. And this was maybe the most frightening thing, that the restricted time limit, it should be written in the last year, and it should be available, most of it, today. And the lucky thing is that I could find a co-author in the name of Claudia Bernardi, who is, well, not only bright and smart, but who has a work ethic that I'm completely amazed of. And she did a lot of the writing, and she delivered text as a clockwork, And these texts were read and reread by us and discussed in a way that how does it fit within a framework that we think is suitable to tell a story, an original story, a new story of global history of humanity that can engage both, let's say, readers outside the normal academic world, but also can engage educators and pupils. Now Claudia's not here, she's doing field work again, that's her main job, on migration between the United States and in Mexico. She's engaged, she's part of Roma III University, but I have to mention her because without her the book would never have delivered. And of course then, secondly, there's a whole team that is built around this book. I will not say much about it because it's not my domain. You will hear about it if you want this afternoon. The team that was doing the layout, the graphics, the beautiful maps that will be part of the book, the timeline, and not last but not least, the educational apparatus that will go along the book, which is, of course, actually the second pillar. It's not only the text, it's, of course, the whole apparatus that, that makes suggestions how to use history in class. What I also have to say that after this first round, we delivered and we published what we call a proof version. This is not, as we hope, a final version. We are very aware that there are flaws in it. There are probably parts that are too difficult, high-browsed, that can be translated, maybe some mistakes even. Some teaching units will not work, some others are of course, ideal. So there is a second round, so that actually in the next year that we envisage a more final and finalized version. So all criticism welcome, don't shoot at the pianists because they have still to be alive to work on that second version. Now, about the choices we made, and I think the first very important thing, and it can sound as very, let's say, a truism, like it is normal, but it's very vital. That is, when you write a book like that, when you write anything, actually, you have to make choices. There's no way to tell a neutral story. So these choices have to be made clear. It is, the reader has a right to know what are the choices made by the authors. And these choices are very deliberately made. So we know that there is no neutral story to be told about humanity. We know that actually telling the story, making those choices, is part of the educational process. Making clear to the reader, making clear to the students that what you're telling is also a human choice, and that you can make other choices. So that it stimulates criticism, that it stimulates like thinking and rethinking what they are telling. Is that something I buy or I don't? And when I don't buy it, what is my choice then? So we made, for example, a very explicit choice not to write a history starting in Europe. It's a non-European centric history. It's a choice, because most histories are Eurocentric. Even the histories that claim they are global are actually very Eurocentric. We tried not to do that. Others will decide if we were successful or not. But that's a very important message, that we think by saying that this is not the final version of some human history already is part of developing a critical mind about, well, using history. Well, let's show what kind of choices we made. Now, I used the introduction and the last part of the book to build up my short expose here. And I show you the... No, first I have to say, of course, but you know that, if that will work.
Perhaps with the mouse.
Oh, no, I mean, it's okay. Of course, that is book, but that's not. It's an edition of, it's a proof version, and it's not for dissemination beyond reviewers at this stage, and that's who is financing and actually publishing the book, but it's what you know. This is how we start. Let's read it. So the book, we're talking to students, the book that you have in your hands is a complex object that comes out from a long working of thinking, production, organization, networking, and many other actions of some humans who have decided to create this curious object that will accompany you for some time during school. This book is about your history, and it's about our history. So it's not crowded with king's names, dates and events. You will find very few names in the book and dates in the book, except the timelines. And you would probably forget after a few months. It's not the history of your country, as nations of very young political formations. Their history is not able to give account of our past as humans, as a human group on this planet. This book tells another story, a story about the planet on which you are born and live. It's a story about planet Earth and the humans who have inhabited it. And above all, about their fascinating and often troublesome relations. That's the first claim we make. And as I said, actually the first argument we have to make is why history? In what way can history serve a goal that actually is geared towards contemporary society? But because, let's clear, everything that we write, even it's about very ancient history, is actually meant to say something about us now. If it's not, I don't think it's, well, maybe it's good literature, but it's not academic, it's not science, it's not educational. Anyway, that's a point of view. So, in a history, and the point we want to make is that there are two ways to do history, and they are combined. And you have to combine them, and that's the reason we need history. Of course, there is what we could say a true history. It's a history of, well, what actually happened. You cannot invent something. You have to follow science. You have to follow what we know. And that actually thing that happened is a narration of our past as humans who have forged our life on planet Earth from when we started to become humans, which is a long time ago. But secondly, history is also imagination. Because we imagine the past, we make a story. The storyline is not given. We make a story from events, from facts, from knowledge, from processes, and so on and so forth. So it's a history that brings a story of what might have happened. There is a lot that we don't know. Well, 99.99% what happened on Earth, we don't know. So we try to imagine it and make a sensible story about it. So such a history is an adventurous journey into foreign lands, often unknown and far away. That's actually how you start. That's why I started to study history anyway. It's the most crazy adventure you can have. And the third element is that every history, as I said, you're right, should be a contemporary history. Even if it's a history of the Neanderthals or a history of ancient Rome. It should be contemporary because, and it is contemporary because you write it with the eyes of today. You interpret it, you give it meaning with the eyes of today, always. So the history that has been written by past generations is a different one that we are writing now. And it's normal. So every history, good history, is contemporary history, whether you are talking about very far away countries or talk about the past of yesterday. The second point is that the history we want to write is a human history. It's not the history of everything. It's not the history of the universe. Since the Big Bang until today, it's about humans. So And there we had to make a choice. We start 70,000 years ago. It's not the birth of modern humankind, because that's about 250,000 years ago, but it's the start of the big migration out of Africa. Okay, there are many discussions about it, but at that moment, a very small group of humans survived, went through a real bottleneck, and this group of humans are our ancestors. We are all 7-8 billion people, descendants of a very small bunch of people that survived 70,000 years ago, some ecological crisis, some hundreds of people, and these are giving the DNA that we all share. 99.99% is the same for every human. So that's the basic idea. The humans are a common condition for our existence on planet Earth. And we embrace the idea to stay human. We are all humans, despite differences, social, cultural construction that made peoples. So we very consequently talk in the book about humans, and not about man, women, not about people, and because they're all there, the construction starts. And every construction about man, women, we heard the presentation before this one, is a construction, but then starts filling in, okay, but what makes a distinction? Why are, and so on and so forth. So we deliberately talk about humans, and then humans divide themselves or are divided by the rulers in social groups, gender, and so on and so forth, in peoples. And a further hierarchy and distinction is the outcome of historical processes, and that is what we want to explain, how these historical processes made humanity so unequal and divided in so many groups. So that's why it's also history of the unequal relationship between rulers and ruled. We don't claim that history is a history of us all. And that's a very easy way of to say, well, we are living in the global village, and we are all on the same ship, and we are all responsible for climate change, and so on and so forth. We claim that some humans are more responsible than others, and that there is a big inequality from a long time ago, and that becomes bigger and bigger and more prevalent in nowadays, and that creates the contemporary society. So we have to understand unequal relationship that rule the world. And it includes decisions of a small part of humanity that have shaped the world as such. We have to understand who that part is and why did they make the decisions they made in villages, in empires, in economies, in the global society today, but also how other groups reacted to that. How, let's say, groups that have less power reacted to that and made counter-narratives and rebellions and so on and so forth. So how worlds were created by accepting, refusing, or resisting domination. So all these actions and reactions make up history, forge processes of change and transformation that happened over time and are constructed or remembered centuries or millennia later. Let's say that's how we bring in humans as the main actors, but they are not organized in an equal way. Now, of course, these humans made their worlds not in an empty arena. The arena they made their world was one that exists already for millions of years. Arena of nature, of other forms of life that accompany human life for thousands of years. So the history of humans is perceived in the book very explicitly as a history of nature. And humans are not the antagonistic to nature. No, they are part of nature. Of course, they come out of nature. But then, in the process of humanity, they start to reshape nature. And that, of course, makes humans very specific and very different from other species of life, that we not only built societies, we built infrastructures, we built airplanes, we built bridges and so on and so forth, and we cut forests and we mined ores, and we did things that other species never did. So we started to change nature, and in that way that the relation between human and non-human nature is very crucial in understanding human history in the long run. So humans have always been part of nature. We are still part of nature, of course, but that nature, what we perceive as nature, is not a given thing. We create nature. We create the world outside. We have the power to do that, and that's why we have so much responsibility towards that, what we call nature. But not as we now perceive it since some centuries as external, we and the nature outside. No, we should think about humans and non-humans in one holistic framework. So nature is not given, it's the outcome of the manipulation and conscious intervention of humans since their appearance on planet Earth, since we started to burn forests and hunt mammoths and kill big animals and so on and so forth. The shifting relationship of humans with each other and with other forms of life create varying zones of contact, which we call frontiers. And that's a deliberate choice we made, that we use the concept of frontiers throughout the book. Frontier is a very crucial concept which we think enables us to understand human history in the long run and in very different forms. Frontier is the contact zones that we create with the outside world. And as humans, we do that very often very violently. As I said, we cut the woods, we make grasslands, we change landscapes, we kill animals, and we recreate nature and so on. And these are frontiers. These are the contact zones in which human action changes non-human nature. Or we use non-human nature. When we use, when we mine ores, when we dig in the earth, when we pollute waters, and all kinds of things, human actions creating or transforming the outside world is what we call frontier making. Frontiers connect different spaces of organic and non-organic world. And frontiers existed when we were hunter-gatherers. Then we were exploring frontiers because we followed the animals that we hunted. But frontiers, of course, exist now. We try to find new frontiers. We dig deeper and deeper to find oil. We create frontiers in space. We try to develop the frontier of the Arctic and the Antarctic. So we are still busy to create new frontiers because we need new energy, we need new resources. So these frontier-making things are absolutely crucial to understand human life. And even more, frontiers are also then created and recreated by humans to make differentiation between humans themselves. And we created differences between civilized peoples and uncivilized people, between rulers and slaves, between men and women. And these borders, these front lines, these frontiers are also very crucial in the way we rule the world and we understand the world. So frontier making, because they are not given. None of these frontiers existed before us. We all created them as humans. So frontier making is really the human action par excellence, we would say. So it's very crucial in our story. So frontiers originate, they shift, they disappear over time, they come back, they play a first-rate role in human social change. They build walls as also bridges, because we connect continents, we connect people again, so we also bridge, of course. We determine exclusion and also inclusion, who is excluded, who is included. Think about the walls we are now building around Europe or between Mexico and the United States. They enforce new rules, but also give space for resistance. Frontiers is also a space where people very often reinvent who they are and try to to find answers on the place they have and why they have not the same rights, or why they are excluded, why they are suppressed, why they are ruled by others. So in these frontier zones very often are the beginnings of new resistances or counter-narratives and so on and so forth. So, and then we had to write that global history. And, well, one simple definition, of course, of a global history is that, well, let's take humanity as a whole. But that's exactly what we didn't want to do. Because humanity is, well, on the first definition, we have one humanity because we're all descendants of the same group of migrants 70,000 years ago. But on the other hand, we are very different. We made a lot of differences. We don't. So we have to understand these differences too. And that's why we define global history as the history of humans making, defining, reorganizing their worlds in plural. What we have done throughout history, and what we do now with this book also, is invent the world we are living in. Imagine the world we are living in. And now we have the tools, we have the media, we have the knowledge, we have the maps and so on, that we can imagine our world on planet Earth as a whole. But most time of history, people didn't have those tools. They didn't know that other peoples were living on the other side of the globe. So they imagined their world on, let's say, on a smaller scale. But this is also a world. So people have made worlds all the time, have made their history all the time, have made and written world history all the time. But that world is not covering the globe. So there is a difference between world history or global history and the history of the globe. That's what we want to say. That humans made their worlds by also imagining them, by writing history about them. And when we go back in time, when we look at the old Chinese writings or Greek writings, and even in the Middle East and so on, that you see that people wrote histories and invented histories, the rulers did, to understand who they were. So the human world is not an object. We don't treat it as a given. We treat it as something that has invented by humans time and again. It's an outcome of interaction and struggle between human activity and other forces of nature. So we created worlds, we carved worlds, let's say, literally in the big woods, you could say, but we imagined the worlds. We are the inside world, and then we have the outside world. We have the frontier, and outside the world, there's the barbarian world, or the unknown world, the world of the ghosts, the world of the dragons, and the world of all kinds of creatures we don't know, but we are very afraid of. The world of the night, of the dark. So that's also world making. So that means that space and time, of course, are crucial in every history book, but space and time are not given. Space is something that can change. Some space-making efforts of humans were very small, and certainly in ancient times. We didn't know that the world was bigger. We didn't perceive that. So space can be small, but also our space in this room is a small space, but can be felt as a kind of a world because we are connected here. So we make worlds on different spaces, different levels, and this space grow in extension throughout history. And we have now a global space, but not everything what we do is on a global space. Actually, almost nothing what we do is on a global level. Most what we do is on an individual level, is on a family-based level, is on a community-based level. So these kind of space making allows us to be non-centric. Don't start with a given space at the start. And many histories start with a state. Let's tell the history of Italy. Let's tell the history of Belgium. Or let's tell the history of Europe, of Europe expansion. Then we have a global history. No, you start with the space that exists. Europe is an invention. It's also invented by people. So when you don't do that, you have a more non-centric, way of looking. So at the center of the textbook, we placed humans in their relationship with planet Earth in different ways. And in different environments. And all over the world, we try to bring information what they did and why they did it. Not only just one space, for example, Europe. Also, time is a difficult thing because, well, we had to think about time, and 70,000 years in 3 volumes, yeah, it's not easy. And what you can expect also happened is that for the earlier periods, the time frame is much bigger. The first volume is covering almost 70,000 years, and the second volume is covering 1,500 years, and the third volume is only covering 500 years. So time becomes smaller. But that's also interesting. How come? And what makes that we think about when time becomes closer to our era that the time frames become smaller? So it is a creation, but that allows us to think about that and not just to take it as given. So we also want to understand how these worlds have been created and imposed by mostly the ruling class groups, empire states, companies also. Nowadays, time is much created, the time we live in, by social media. And you know who controls social media. It's not the state, it's not you, it's someone else. So we look at the story of how local transformations were linked and interconnected to broader ones, regional, intercontinental, and now also global ones. And also the concept of frontier comes here back because when you have friction between scales, you also can understand it as frontier. I know maybe it sounds abstract, but we try to make it concrete in the book. So, having said that, we could think about a structure. We had to think very fast about the structure. And we chose a structure that is both chronological and thematic. Now, this sounds evident, but of course, this is begging the question. So, the chronology is in how we build up the 3 volumes. The 3 volumes cover different time frames. The first volume is from the start of that last, it's not the first human migration out of Africa, but it's the most successful one, about 70,000 years ago, or until 1,000 before our common era. We use this kind of time frame. And it covers a period that we call is mostly typified by an expansion of frontiers. Humans are actually expanding the lands where they live on. What you see is that it's a long process of a human migration, the most successful one, you could say, in history, that we actually ended up in almost all places on Earth except the most unlivable ones, deserts, ice caps, high mountains, but the rest you find humans about 3,000 years ago. Then what we see is also due to human demographic increase that these frontiers become more interconnected again. Actually, as humans, we departed from our brothers and sisters. We said goodbye. The one went left and we went right. But our descendants found each other back. That's what happened when Europeans sailed the ocean and met indigenous people in what they called the Americas. Of course, they were brothers and sisters, but they haven't met for 20,000, 30,000 years. And then what happened, we know it was not that kind of a friendly meeting. We started to kill each other, or well, some of them killed other ones. So it's a connection of frontiers and the creation of systems that cross continents. And that's what you know. And the third volume then, I said 500 years, it's less, it's 150 years. It's about intensification of frontiers. What we see in the last, let's say, 1.5, 2 centuries, that these interconnected frontiers become much more intensified, and that because of a new acceleration within a system that we have called capitalism, that frontier formation becomes so intense that virtually every human society on Earth becomes integrated and impacted by this exploitative system. And that's something that we told in the last volume. So these these are the 3 volumes, and then we divide every volume in 3 chronological chapters. So when you can count well, we have actually 9 chronological chapters. The last one is a rather different one because that's about today. So there we have a different logic, but each of the other chapters have the same subdivision. Here we follow a thematic approach. In each chapter we start what we can call an imagine. We thought this is a way of trying to grasp the attention. The imagine picture is we actually try to stimulate imagination in 2 ways. We describe think about you when you are a bird in that era and you fly over planet Earth. What do you see? You see very different thing when people were still hunting animals than when you fly Earth in, let's say, 1950. So what do you see? And secondly, you are a youngster, you're about 14, 15 years old, and you are living in that time. What are you doing? So these 2 imagines try to grasp some attention, and then we build on 4 themes that come back in every chapter, from the first one until the last one. And these themes, I will say a bit more. But in the whole idea is not that this thematic approach is, well, through this thematic approach, we wanted to be sure that you also can read the book in a thematic way. Basically, you can read the book only reading one of the themes. But secondly, that these themes are constructed in a way that they also connect to each other. Just to show that whatever storyline you build, it is connected. Actually, you disentangle parts of reality in a more or less, artificial way, because it's not true that people do different things, think, let's do now something cultural, and then tomorrow I will do something political, and then I will work on the land because I have to do something economical. So we didn't do that. We didn't use these kind of concepts, so we had to find new ones that were more directed toward comparisons, toward connections, toward networks. And instead of reading historical transformation as single topics, we have chosen to present issues organized in 4 themes to look at different transformations occurred in the world. And these themes are, first, the relation of humans with the outside world. How do we interact, and in what way, what kind of choices did we make towards that world that we actually originated in? Because we were confronted with all kinds of nature, you could say, that of course existed before, and then we started to change that. So it's also very much about technology, about knowledge, about science, and these kinds of inventions we made to understand nature in a different way. So we started to change nature as hunter-gatherers, and we changed nature, of course, as you know, nowadays more than ever. Second one is about humans as migrating actors. We have been migrants all the time. We start with the big migration out of Africa, and we end with global migrations today, and we try to find out in what way migration, the mobility of humans, made actually human societies as we know them. We would never have been successful. We would never have survived if we were not mobile. That's actually the single one secret of human success, that we were so mobile. And how come that migration has become such something that we are now fearing, while it actually is the base of success of society? Then we move in on the internal societal facets. How have humans organized themselves? And of course, we very much focus here on different forms of categorizing humans. When did we start to categorize humans in higher and lower classes? When did we start to use race and gender? How was it used to build up power? How was it used to build new narratives about our destiny and so on? So social organization in different ways will be or is discussed in the third theme. And the last one, and that I think is something new you don't find in another textbook. Well, most of them are, the way we handle them are new, but this one is what we call worldviews. As I said from the start, it's really important to understand not only what people actually did, but how did they perceive their world? What meaning did they give to their world? Well, in more classical thematic approach, you could maybe call it, well, it's about culture. Well, let's also say something in the end about culture. But it's more than that. It's about how we used culture to legitimize what we were doing. So it's about religion. It's about ideology. It's about maps. How maps create a world and make sense of worlds. It's about histories. What kind of histories did we build about ourselves? And how did it change? What kind of histories did the people on the American continent tell about themselves? What kind of histories did the people living in Africa tell about themselves? And so on and so forth. So these worldviews are very important because they take us also back to one of the most essential elements we think in this book, is that worldviews are not stable. Worldviews are not given. Worldviews are made up by some people and imposed on other people. But worldviews change. And if you can give that message to people, worldview change. So you can build also your worldview. It's not, you don't have to take for granted what's told. Not in this book, of course. So that is, you have a power. You have a power to imagine the world, to reimagine the world, and maybe to do something that. Because people have done it all the time. So why not? We are not powerless. And that's, I think, a very important message that you can build in that idea of world views. So we go through the same historical period 4 times, you could say, and analyzing 4 different sets of themes, issues, and problems. Now you find, of course, in the book much more. I cannot tell about that because I haven't seen a final version yet. I heard some of volumes are online now. You'll find there are timelines. Very basic timeline, because actually we are not really stressing events. We are not stressing that you have to learn kings and queens and battles and battlefields and these kind of elements. But of course, you have to have a timeline in your head. Without timeline in your head, it becomes very confusing. So we build a timeline, but it's a trial. I think, well, maybe that's an element where we need really feedback. We have a lot of maps, and many maps are drawn and redrawn in the phase of the production of these volumes. These are very wonderful, and using maps is absolutely, I think, essential. But also here, every map, and that's part of the workshop this afternoon, every map tells a story. And if you ignore it, even then it tells a story, because it has a point of view. Why is the north on the up and south down? Why? Who decided that? Just to start that, and so on. And of course, the whole educational apparatus that's built around it makes the book, of course, much more than just a story. Now, the last thing I want to say is, and that's where we finish, is that, yeah, we struggled, of course, with something. Well, let's not become too people that wants to bring very clear message. Let's find the message and let's spread the message. What did we learn? But on the other hand, it's, as I said, it's not neutral. So we want to say something. And we want to say something about the present. And that's why we framed it in that sentence, learning the past to change the present. It is something vital when you want to understand the present and to change the present, because the past impinges on the present. If you deny it or not, the past is not just a dead weight that's of all those 80 billion people that ever have lived until today and that are now died and just are pressing us, making us very depressed, like we will die too. You can look at that, but also it brings us a world that we inherited. But we can take lessons from that. And yeah, lessons, it's very 70s, I know, but I think there is a way to do that. So the educational goal of this textbook is to analyze, criticize, compare, test, and broaden views on the history of humans and the planet they inhabit. It should help you in putting yourselves in other humans' lives. I think that's a human capacity that we can have if we are very careful using it. But that's a very strong point that we have. It's a fundamental practice of knowledge to understand our world and other worldviews. Not only our worldview, but other worldviews. So we can consider this book maybe as a compass that orients our reading of this story of human history. We also can use the text as a logbook. That is a notebook of our travels across time that we can rewrite and change at every step, and that can be rewritten. But the idea that we need a compass and we need a notebook, I think, is a very essential one. And in the last pages, we worked on some themes. We actually reflected on, well, what kind of themes showed up through the text from the start and are now still very, not only relevant, very essential in the way we think about the world today. And then we saw that actually by starting to write about our human ancestors 70,000 years ago, that almost all themes we developed there are still relevant today. Of course, they are translated, they are now in a very different way present, but they are there. It's a theme about who are we? How many are we? What about human and demographic evolutions? What about the fact that we face again a very essential demographic change because populations in the old continents, Europe and America, will age very quickly. And that populations in the new of the other continents, it has been also said this morning, are much younger. So there will be a demographic change within a few decades that will really have an impact on the world that's organized today. Inequalities, how are inequalities organized? We know that inequality is rising. There are so many figures that is illustrating that, but will we accept it again? And will we accept it in the future? And what kind of inequalities? Because these are inequalities within social groups, but also inequalities between regions. And the impact on migration is very visible today. The whole notion of frontiers, frontier extraction. The system we are living in today lives from frontier extraction. We need new frontiers. Water is a new frontier. Water will be one of the battlegrounds of the next century. We thought of water, well, water is free. If there's anything free, it's water. You can drink it because it's there. It's rain, it comes from the air. No, water is commercialized completely. These frontiers will extend. It's related to the commodification of everything. Everything becomes commodified. When you walk the beach here in Senigallia, it's not a public beach. It's a privatized beach. All those chairs that you see till the waterline, who is owning that? Why do they do? So you don't feel anymore that you walk over a common property beach. You feel like I'm intruding in something that's controlled by some company, by some hotel. So this is privatization, this is commodification. It's going on and on. The meaning of work. What is work? What is paid work? What is unpaid work? What is the living? Why and when can work guarantee that you have decent living or not? That is changing very rapidly. The connotation of the 20th century we are losing fast. The impact of global migrations, I don't have to say more about that, but that will be more and more pressing in the next decades, certainly also because climate change. The worldviews. What kind of worldviews are and will we start to develop? And what can we imagine? Are we still capable to imagine new views? As our ancestors have done time and again. They have reimagined the world many, many times. So, but what kind of stories are imaginable? Or not possible, I would say imaginable. That's a start. And then the whole story of resistance and the common, we start with the common, of course, the start of reimagination actually starts from what do we perceive as common. Our past as common, our world as common, nature as common, climate as common, the beach of Senigallia as common. What is common? And what is... and if something is common, you can much easier reflect on that than you say, oh, it's not, it has nothing to do with me because it's owned by Google or Facebook or whatever, because also information is becoming commercialized, as you know. So how can you build up counter-narratives that stress the common more? So that's where we start, and I think that's also where I end.
Thank you.